Welcome back to the Non-Musician's Intro to Digital Music Composition. For this lesson, we're going to take a look at some music that everybody loves from The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Now, I've got a MIDI file here, which I'm going to drag in at the start of my new project here. And I just grabbed this from vgmusic.com. Highly recommend this website. It's full of MIDI files, mostly for older games, like up through about the GameCube generation, but they have a few more modern things. But if you want to look at an old song from an old game that you really like, this is great. In general, looking at MIDI files is super helpful. You can find MIDI files for any classical piece, and a lot of popular songs as well. So when you drag that into Reaper, it'll just pop it open as it is here, set the tempo properly, and you'll have all your tracks. However, they will not be set up with instruments, apparently. Reaper does not have a built-in, MIDI bank, which is kind of interesting, actually. Most programs do. You could find a free MIDI VST, it wouldn't be difficult, but we're just going to set this up with some synths, and we're only going to look at one of these tracks anyway. The one everybody recognizes. So for now, I'm going to delete these, and we'll just zoom right in here, set this up with a basic, let's go with a square. I like squares. Alright, perfect. This first part here is what I want to focus on because it is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, of doing something and then doing it again differently. In this case, you have this first section that repeats. And this bit here is immediately established as one of the main parts of the song. Then, for this third time, it repeats again, you get this whole repetition, but instead of finishing, it changes. And by changing before it finishes, the listener is expecting something different than a fourth repetition. It sort of primes them to have something new happen. They're ready for new material. Then, when the new material comes in, you'll notice it sort of follows that general theme here. You've got a similar motion going downward, slightly different, similar motion going up, slightly different, and all resolving back down here to E, which is kind of an interesting choice since the melody starts on F. Ordinarily, a melody like this would end somewhere around C or A. It's, again, standard practice is to have the fourth or the fifth note in the scale go back to the first one. But, as you can see here, this is the seventh note in the scale going back to the first one. And obviously it sounds fine, people love it. So, don't feel constrained by what leads where and just focus on what sounds good. You've got plenty of time spent in these tones up here, the fourth and the fifth notes. Goes up, comes back down, so that essentially what this E note is doing is the ear of the listener is going to expect this to go down to F. It doesn't quite, it's just slightly off, then it dances around a little bit more, and then it's back to F to start the melody over again. So you're sort of delayed gratification, basically toying with your listener, which, if you do it right, they love it. And then that repeats again, but with a slight variation. And this slight variation comes in during the fast part. Fast parts are good places to insert variation because it, the listener is expecting things to change quickly, so when it changes pitch, it's not as shocking as if they're expecting a note to hold and then the note doesn't hold. Right, so you have this, what is this, an E. E gets thrown in again, which is a note that the listener expects to hear at this point, but sooner than it was in the previous repetition. So you've got some consistency there, and then that same downward motion that you see here is present here, but it starts higher and it ends higher. Everything is shifted up 2 notes on the scale, except for this first note, which is up 3. Anyway, preserving this general motion as well from this initial melody of 2 short notes and then a longer note. This note is obviously a lot longer, but that same theme is there. You see it again here, right at the very end. And again, this sequence, the listener expects it to go to F because that's where this, that's what this melody is based around, but it goes to E, and delayed resolution there. Especially with G here, then down to E. It's just going all around F without ever landing on it. Until you get to this next section. And again, 2 shorts and a long note. Again and again. That's what's called a motive. I think I've mentioned it before, but just think of that one song by Bach. Everybody knows it. Dun 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 dun. That's a motive. Likewise, this sequence of 3 notes here, this is a motive, and it repeats throughout this melody, and really is why the song is so catchy. Any catchy song has a clearly defined, frequently used motive. General technique, keep the rhythm the same, change the pitches involved. That's a good way to reuse a motive. Moving right along, this section right here is basically completely different. It just throws everything off, which is great, breaks up. You have this like really heavy section, which is positively dripping with the main motive, and then you have this entirely new material here, which it's basically like a palate cleanser. It's totally unexpected, but leads right into the song looping again. And that's good because it stands out in an ending, and since this song is a song that loops, it's good to have a strong cue like that at the end so that the listener gets ready for it to loop, basically. They're expecting it to start over. And if they like the song, expecting it to start over is good. It's good that they're ready for that. While we're on the subject of looping, I'm going to digress slightly and talk about how to export files, because that's something that I haven't covered yet, and you will probably want to know that if you'd like to share your music with anyone who doesn't have Reaper and all the same plugins you have, because sending around project files is obnoxious if people are using different plugins. To export something, you just go up here, File, and Render. And you've got a lot of options on this screen, but basically you just need to worry about the file name and the output format, this drop-down box here. For the vast majority of your time as a composer, you will use 2 file formats. The first is WAV, the second is MP3. There are a few instances where you might use AIFF, OGG, and maybe FLAC, depending on who you're working with. But for now, WAV, MP3. Basically, a WAV is uncompressed. This means the files are huge, but the quality is exactly as you hear it in your project file. WAVs are great for finished products. Anytime you have a final thing that you're really happy with and it's done, render it as a WAV and hang on to that. Because then if you want to convert a WAV to any other file type, you can do so without any additional loss of quality. An MP3, on the other hand, is compressed. The good news is this makes the file sizes much more manageable, and most of what you send around to people will be MP3s. The downside is that if you convert an MP3 to any other file type, you lose some quality. So you ideally just want to convert once. That said, MP3s have a few quirks about them that can come up. For example, we were talking about looping. MP3s do not loop cleanly. they always have a hiccup when they start. So this means you cannot make a seamlessly looping song in MP3 format. You can, however, have silence at the beginning and the end of the song, and then it will loop just fine. WAV, on the other hand, will loop seamlessly. And OGG, which is a compressed format, also loops cleanly. So that's why you might find yourself using some OGG formats, especially if you're getting involved with like video game work, because they loop cleanly and they're compressed. Win-win all around. The downside is they're a little less widely used, so that's why MP3 is kind of the main format. Make sure this is set on 44/100, and this is set to stereo. You do not want this set to mono. You may tweak these projects later. Oh, and definitely make sure this is set to entire project. This is something, if you have like a subset of the project selected, such as say you were just listening to this part, and then you render, by default this won't change, but sometimes it can get set to time selection, and then you're only going to get a small bit of your project to render, and that's obnoxious if you can't figure out why it's happening. So, entire project, file name, these should be fine. Pick your format, and leave all this as it is, and then you hit render, and you will get this box the first time you try to render an MP3. Don't panic, very normal. The same thing happens if you're working with Audacity. So, you'll just click here, and it's kind of silly that that file's not included, but you'll just grab whichever encoder DLL you want here, as appropriate for your operating system. As you can see, I've downloaded this one before. So, download that. I have it here, and then just move that to wherever you have Reaper installed, and try that one more time, and voila. You'll get this little pop-up box, and that's going to render fairly quickly. Rendering music is not like rendering, video, 3D graphics, or any of that stuff. It's pretty fast. Generally faster than real time. So, not too big of a deal if it doesn't sound good. Then you'll want to either open the file, show it in Explorer, doesn't really matter which, and give it a listen. Bingo. Sounds great. I'll just clear that time selection. So now you know how to render your files, and that's awesome. You can send them around, share them with people, and generally have a good time. So, that's all for this little lesson. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned.